24 months ago or 36 months ago, perhaps, it was a fantasy that such a thing would be available at your fingertips or part of a daily physician's life. And we went from that to, revolutionizing the field.
Artificial intelligence, or AI, is inescapable these days. Every time we turn on the TV, attend a meeting, or open our phones, we are inundated with discussion about AI, if not actually using AI itself. And healthcare, of course, is no exception. To hear some tell it, AI is going to revolutionize everything we do, from how we make diagnoses, medical imaging and radiology, etc., to drug discovery, even surgery. But today, rather than talk about what might be around the corner, I'd like to focus a little bit on what's already here, so-called AI scribes. Hi, I'm Derek Angus, a physician and senior editor at JAMA. You're listening to Healthy Dialogue, a new podcast from the JAMA network, where we'll be discussing some of the most pressing issues in health and healthcare with leading experts from around the world. AI scribes first began rolling out in 2020 as tools that basically could be in the room listening to conversations and then help physicians generate notes. Idea being to tackle the terrible burden of documentation. It was just over a year or so ago, I was having a conversation with Dr. Vincent Liu, Chief Data Officer of the Permanente Medical Group in Kaiser Permanente. There was a group of us, and we were all amazed because at that point, Kaiser Permanente was already rolling this technology out and had over 1 million patient-physician encounters where an AI scribe had been in the room. That wasn't that long ago. Yet, I'm going to guess that we're going to have the 1 billionth patient-physician encounter sometime later this year, or at least in the coming months. Already, at least 30% of physician practices are using AI scribes, and pretty much every healthcare system has reported that it has bought or invested in AI scribe technology. And there's good reason why. Scribes have already been shown to reduce administrative burden and even burnout. But there are concerns, particularly around approval processes. Scribes have effectively avoided FDA approval. But as these scribes become more sophisticated and start to do more than just help capture the note, but really getting not just from what did the patient say, but what could the differential diagnosis actually be and what might be the best treatment plan, then it's really crossing into becoming a complex clinical decision support tool. At which point that raises the issue of whether maybe it would need more sort of FDA oversight or approval. It also raises, perhaps more existentially, the question of what does it actually mean to be a doctor when there's this incredibly powerful assistant doctor, this AI scribe that's in the room. So, in today's episode of Healthy Dialogue, I'm joined by none other than Vincent Liu, who has absolutely been on the bleeding edge of implementing this technology and has just authored an editorial on one of the most robust evaluations of AI scribes to date across 5 healthcare systems. It was just published in JAMA. So, Vinny, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Exciting times.
Well, happy to have you, Vinny. I really want to dig into some deeper questions about how scribes are changing or how they could change what it is that we even do as doctors. But why don't we just start with the basics? Perhaps you could just fill us in on what are AI scribes, in particular, what is ambient AI and an ambient AI scribe, and what is the current state of affairs?
Yeah. I mean, at its core, it's speech recognition, the ability to diarize conversations, that is to assign speaking roles to different people who are participating in the conversation, and then to take that information and put it through a bunch of, large language models and other tools in order to generate a draft note. And that draft note could be either a direct transcript of that conversation, or a synthesized kind of clinically ready, clinically acceptable note that would look like what documentation looks like in today's healthcare ecosystem.
Or look better.
Or look better, right?
Yeah.
Ideally look better.
Well, that sounds pretty good. So based on that, this may be obvious, but just to be explicit about it, what's been the rationale for using ambient AI as a smart scribe?
This technology was developed to overcome the crushing burden of documentation. There's lots of things that doctors do. I think the most important is diagnosis, treatment, communication. There's a lot they end up having to do that doesn't seem related to those. Various clicks in the EHR, writing notes, providing forms, letters, a lot of that type of thing. And ambient AI scribes came along and at least took this slice of documentation burden away by allowing that AI scribe to listen passively in the background and also improve the kind of in-room conversations between physicians and patients. And I think that's been why it's been accepted like wildfire.
So right now, there are a few dozen companies all working on these AI scribes. And the scribes themselves, they vary a lot in what they can do. Obviously, the idea begins with capturing the physician's note. But of course, the note is much more than just the conversation with the patient. It includes the full history and exam, some of which can be extracted by the scribe or by this AI tool from the electronic health record. And it concludes with an assessment and plan that, in theory, includes a differential diagnosis, treatment recommendations, additional tests, and so on. And some of these new scribes, they take on many of these tasks, don't they? Far beyond just summarizing the conversation. By the way, I should point out, as an example, the AMA, the American Medical Association, which is the publisher of JAMA, and it's not the only publishing house to do this, the AMA has agreements with AI companies in this space, including Open Evidence and Abridge, allowing them to use published research to inform the models of these AI companies to help them deliver information and suggestions to the clinician. In other words, it seems we will increasingly see these smart scribes link what they hear and surmise about the patient to the medical literature itself to aid in making medical diagnoses and offering treatment recommendations.
Yeah, that's absolutely the direction that the technology has moved. So I think one of the reasons that the adoption was so rapid was because the initial product was very narrow and relatively lightweight or clean with respect to its integration, right? So it was, an external app in a protected environment, and then you would cut and paste that note into the record. And so that's just a really clean, from an IT perspective, application. But as these tools have gotten more integrated into the EHR, you can start them from the EHR itself and it's directly integrated. The opportunities for it now to begin going out and knowing more about the context of the patient visit, the patient history, the medication profiles, maybe even recent results, and to make that patient context more available to the note itself, as well as what you're saying is now also move out to guidelines, whether those are internal clinical protocols or external information from professional societies, from peer-reviewed literature, and elsewhere, and now begin to weave all of those things together in the context of this piece of documentation. And that's moving beyond just reducing the clerical burden. It's actually augmenting kind of the thought process, the synthesis, the differential diagnosis, and ultimately the treatment of the clinician.
And just to be clear, this is happening at breakneck speed. Everyone is trying to gain a competitive edge. Everyone's coming out with new and improved versions. For example, Epic, one of the largest providers of electronic health records in the country, they're developing their own tool that can go right inside of their own EHR, correct?
That's correct. I mean, they've made announcements saying they're going to have their own ambient product They've worked closely with the top vendors in this space in order to ensure that there's a pathway for those to be integrated pretty natively and seamlessly into the EHR. I think they see that voice interaction with a chart and the ability to have this type of functionality integrated directly within where clinicians are working today is a frontier. So they've announced that they're working on that as well. But yes, the number of companies who are offering ambient scribe technology is growing every day. And that's a good thing because it means that there's a lot of competition out there. People are taking advantage of a rapidly improving technology.
And this is moving so fast that if I were to ask, what effect is it having? It might be hard to answer because by the time you can ask the physicians and the patients about a particular product, there's now a new version that's already rolling out. But let's freeze time for a moment. What do we know about these, what I'm going to call these ancient old versions of AI scribes that we were using way back in 2025?
Well, we've done a series of interviews with patients, and I think the large majority of them feel neutral about it or felt that the use of the technology actually improved their interaction with the physicians. More eye-to-eye contact, less time that the clinician's in the room, locked to the keyboard. So, I think in general, the majority of folks have felt that it's improved the interaction. And many of them have given us comments like, I trust my doctor. If this is technology that makes them do their job better, then, it's technology that I'm supportive of. Obviously, for any technology, there are folks who have concerns and they can decline their physician's use of the technology, and that's totally acceptable. We find that in general, that percentage is extremely low.
And what about the doctors? How do they like it?
Doctors love it by and large. And the reason is, again, because it's solving this crushing burden, the clerical burden of documentation. It's freeing them up to also do what they want to do, which is have human face-to-face conversations. There are lots of accounts from KP and from other health systems of clinicians in tears about how it's completely changed their everyday work. And many stories of clinicians who were on the brink of retiring who say, oh, I can go longer because this has really revolutionized my day-to-day and solved a burning pain point for me.
Well, that's great to hear. Does this extend to the so-called pajama time when we're sitting on our couch at night, tending to the administrative tasks that we just didn't have time to get to during our day?
Yes, absolutely. We now have convincing evidence, multiple studies. You referenced one in JAMA, 5 academic health systems that show that there was reductions in the amount of time spent documenting. The landscape shows variability with respect to what the magnitude of that reduction is and how much work outside of work time. But by and large, I would say the consensus is it clearly reduces documentation time. It shows favorable reductions in work outside of work or pajama time. And in the studies that have evaluated burnout, and some of these have been randomized trials, it shows reductions in burnout, which I think is a really powerful indication of how this is improving the sustainability of the clinical workforce by removing what seems like a fairly narrow part of a physician's job, but was something that was contributing to a lot of distress.
And ultimately, where does this land us? Because it seems like in the span of a few years, we are seeing surely one of the largest transitions ever in the lived experience of people who are responsible for healthcare delivery. Certainly, I don't think I have ever seen anything like this in the 30 or 40 years that I've been in practice.
Absolutely. I think 24 months ago, or 36 months ago, perhaps, it was a fantasy that such a thing would be available at your fingertips or part of a daily physician's life. And we went from that to, revolutionizing the field, the rapid spread of this technology, and completely changing parts of that lived experience. I think what that speaks to is look at this one use case And now thinking about, well, how does AI play out in this much, much larger and complicated and dynamic part of the healthcare ecosystem?
And that rapid expansion also begs the question, who's paying for all of this? Healthcare systems aren't exactly known for sort of loose budgets and easy money lying around everywhere. So how did this technology, how did it manage to get healthcare systems to be ready to buy it?
I would say at this point, it's a little bit of the table stakes of healthcare. If it is as transformational as the evidence we're seeing suggests, and it is, then I think any healthcare system would be hard pressed not to be offering this for their physicians that they're partnered with or that they're employing. It's almost at this point, at least version 2025, like a benefit, a wellness benefit or something, because it's that impactful to the sustainability of the workforce. There have been conversations about, does the use of this tool and the reduction of this documentation time or work outside of work mean that now, we can have our physicians see more patients and as a byproduct of that, increase our revenue. There have been examinations of that and suggestions that maybe there is a modest increase in the number of visits or changes to some of the billing. But I don't think that by and large, it's being used as a tool to drive just increased throughput and visits. I think the evaluations which focus just narrowly on kind of number of visits, billing, ignore the fact that turnover of even one physician for a health system is an extremely costly thing. In some cases, like our primary care docs, we don't have enough of them. Making sure that they're in a sustainable position, they're satisfied and maximally equipped to kind of do their job, I think is a really important goal.
So how did we get here? It's important to understand what this technology does or did versus where it's now heading. Initially, it was just meant to summarize a patient interaction, to put together a note. But now, some of these tools are beginning to help the physician comb the literature, analyze the patient history, including all the information sitting inside the electronic health record, and more. It's a little bit like having the uber junior doctor or resident who has seen the patient first and can summarize symptoms, suggest a probable diagnosis, and recommend treatment options to the attending. And so, to me, it sounds like it's moving toward what we would more traditionally call clinical decision support, or CDS, and indeed maybe even more than that. Now, clinical decision support is typically something that the FDA would have classified as software as a medical device, and it would require FDA approval. But because of where Scribes started, they have largely avoided FDA scrutiny, thanks in part to the 21st Century Cures Act, which relaxed regulation for medical software that was only intended to provide support for administrative tasks, such as documenting notes. So with that in mind, I asked Vinny to elaborate on where these scribes sit in the world of medical devices.
There's guidance around what qualifies as software as a medical device. That guidance has been in evolution. How I think about it is it technology or software that is diagnosing, treating, or preventing a disease or a condition? And there's some criteria around what is the timeliness of that decision? What does it expose in terms of thought process, and how does it avoid things like automation bias, which is over-reliance on an output from a software or piece of technology. So without getting into all of those different elements, the summary and synthesis here is not diagnosing, treating, or preventing a specific disease and condition. So I think according to that careful reading is the reason why it's not been subject to FDA review.
Right.
I think in addition to that, there are specific call outs for things like pointing to medical guidelines as an example, as not software as a medical device, right? If it's simply pulling up information that's available in a guideline, making that more transparent and available, that wouldn't fit. So it's walking a line where you could imagine a future in which it feels like it's doing diagnosis, prevention, or treatment, or moving into that territory. But I think currently the technology is moving so fast that I wouldn't say this is completely settled, but this is kind of where the industry is today.
Right. And just to be clear, I don't think either you or I is offering any judgment on whether it should or should not be. Rather, just making it clear that the FDA is largely uninvolved. I don't know whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, but that is where we are. And of course, part of the problem is it isn't necessarily a piece of technology that's offering any specific diagnosis. It's actually helping with every diagnosis, which makes regulation particularly difficult.
Well, I think that's the challenge of generative AI and the powerful technology is in the past, software as a medical device was generally targeted towards one outcome, right? Meant to predict something or meant to interpret whether or not an image, had evidence of a pneumothorax or, heart failure or a pneumonia. Here, the technologies they're not trained to do one thing. They can be used to do anything, produce a thought or a recommendation or information around any diagnosis. So even how you would evaluate that in terms of its performance, I think the whole paradigm of that evaluation is changing.
Right. And that's just today. These assistants are getting more complex and sophisticated by the minute, incorporating video, live streaming, and more. One could imagine it could include the existing standards and procedures for that institution, or it could cross-reference treatment guidelines, recent literature, products such as open evidence, etc. And it could put all of that together and provide advice and counseling, summaries of what's going on for the healthcare provider to sign off on. I'm thinking, are we essentially already there?
Yes, absolutely. I would say we are at this point today, products being released that are doing all of those things, or partnerships being announced in which Ambient AI scribes become Ambient AI assistants, colleagues, where it can do many, many things that would enhance workflows that a clinician would typically do, like looking back through all of the extent of the chart, going out to web references or, clinical guidelines and trying to understand for this condition, what should the treatment be? What does our institution agree? Or what is the paper, or set of medical literature that helps me understand how do I navigate a complex part of this patient's care? And in addition to that, also outreaching to patients potentially, and hey, we're prepping for your upcoming visit. This is what happened last time. This is what you wrote to your doctor about. Can I confirm that this is what you want to talk about? Or, let's get some pre-information just so we can serve that up to the clinician and make this interaction as humane, as informed, as, effective as possible.
So they're not everywhere, but they're on the way. And given the speed this technology is developing, if we could imagine even slicker versions as soon as, this summer, let me run a scenario by you. The most obvious place we see this technology is in the classic outpatient visit between the doctor and the patient. Two people are in a room. There's not much extraneous noise. But of course, a lot of healthcare delivery happens with multiple people. You and I are both intensive care physicians. If we round in the ICU, there's a whole team of people. We're pushing the little cart around with the computer on it that has all the information about the patient. There's also information coming from the bedside monitors and so on. So although most ICUs don't have this now, it's hard to imagine the year ending without institutions deploying some super version of these assistants to completely revolutionize ICU care. In other words, if those current assistants can manage a two-person conversation in a quiet room, they should soon surely be able to listen in a noisier environment to multiple different voices. And then, if that's the case, the entire process of rounding in the hospital or rounding in the ICU, that's going to completely change. That's if we even still have rounding as we know it. But instead of asking the fellow when you're on rounds to pull up the old x-ray or to pull up the latest lab tests and summarize things, the smart assistant, the smart superscribe, they'll be anticipating the information we want. They'll be tracking who's talking and so forth. And they'll be able to pull all of that information together and present it incredibly efficiently in front of us. It'll be able to help do the review of how the kidneys are working, how the lungs are working, present all the information and make recommendations on whether it's time, for example, for another blood test, or do we need another x-ray? Am I on the right track here?
Yeah, I'm sure it's like this at UPMC, and at KP and many other places. The workarounds is exactly that: running lists, pulling up information, checking on what's not been done. It involves a large team because you want the pharmacist there and the nutritionist and the nurse and a whole bunch of physicians, and even the patient's family. So we felt that that's effective because you want to have all of the key experts available to bring their expertise and agree on a plan, especially in that critical care environment where things move very quickly. And then a lot of how the notes and workarounds are structured are to make sure we're not missing potential care gaps. Like, we structure a part about devices or catheters, right, to make sure that they don't stay in too long so that the patient is unnecessarily at risk for infection. Or that we talk about anticoagulation because we don't want, to miss the opportunity to prophylactically anticoagulate a patient without having a clot. So you're exactly right that I think what we're seeing is these tools would be highly capable of synthesizing all of that information. And rather than having each role reporting that out and everybody trying to document that, even taking that burden away so that you would have that information available at your fingertips and able to make these critical decisions much more quickly and then communicate those to patients and families.
To sum it up, where we seem to be heading, at least in the short term, is a future where these AI tools are an add-on that makes being a clinician better, faster, and more effective. But then what? If we're all busy, we're all seeing lots of patients, and we're all using AI assistants, there must come a point where you begin to ask, who's the doctor here? A lot of the things that we thought of as being a doctor, the expertise, the assessments, the plans, could really be generated increasingly efficiently and accurately by these agentic AI products. They're almost digital doctors now. And so then we're asking the human doctor, the analog doctor, to just review and sign off. But we know how busy and overworked human doctors are. If the AI agent is right the first 1,000 times, is the doctor at this point not going to say, oh, I am sure the AI doctor has this? They will increasingly rely on the AI. Now, of course, there are many ways in which you could imagine that patients would massively benefit from a digital doctor with brain power that no human doctor has. The ability to completely avail oneself of the entire world's latest evidence. No human can read all of that information. Patients might not even want to see a human doctor who doesn't have a virtual AI assistant in the room because they're going to think that doctor on their own just won't be good enough. So I asked Vinny, if this plays out even fractionally, even on a small scale, Are we fundamentally redefining the role of the profession? Or are we keeping the same definitions, but we're now saying there are analog doctors and digital doctors? And should these digital doctors also be required to have medical licenses?
I mean, I think that's the conversation that's happening right now in healthcare. And I think that's the conversation that's also happening, in all industries, right? The line between kind of like what is a lawyer, of yesterday and what might a digital lawyer be, or what might a coder, software engineer of yesterday, and what is a software engineer of today. So I think the technology has improved so dramatically that it's forcing that conversation. I think it's important to recognize that the physician role could be broken down into multiple sub roles, right? Is it that they're the best executor of a series of guidelines, right? So every time a patient meets criteria XYZ, they should get this blood pressure medication, et cetera. Is it that they have the most comprehensive, up-to-date knowledge on a specific domain, and they can synthesize kind of like a patient, history, make a diagnosis, or suggest a treatment like in oncology, where the evidence is constantly changing. And so you need a doctor who has mastery over, what is the best current protocol. I think there's the proceduralist part, right? Obviously, doctors who are using their hands and devices in order to do things like surgery and other procedures. And then there's the human part, which is focused on empathy, communication, human touch, the provision of what being a physician was, hundreds or thousands of years ago, like when the armamentarium for actually curing illnesses was quite limited. I think absolutely that AI will overtake, moving beyond augmenting to replacing some of those roles, like, the best fidelity to a set of protocols, because it's shown that I think with the right oversight, it can take that type of role on. I think what will be a challenge is understanding kind of what is the frontier for, how we interact with these systems in the best way. And I have to say, I don't think that is known just yet, but there's concerns on in all directions about what that future would look like.
And again, it's worth mentioning that this is happening at a breakneck pace, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's fast. And I'm not sure if anyone is really in control. And this technology isn't necessarily limited to clinical environments.
Yeah. I mean, I think things are moving extremely fast. I mean, I know our physicians, and I think physicians everywhere, see what's happening, what's available out there, and have a deep hunger for leveraging these technologies to help them be better doctors, right? So I don't think it's driven by, a disregard for what their responsibility is, but they see the way that it's able to synthesize information and its capabilities in terms of documentation or insight generation, knowledge management, even being a thought partner. And so there's a deep hunger for those types of tools to be available to make them more effective at their jobs. And I think Ambient AI Scribes have shown one of those ways that was adopted extremely rapidly. I think you were getting to this, Derek. The other point is these tools are, by and large, they're not like medical grade, but they are largely available to patients. So where there used to be this information asymmetry, right? Like that expert knowledge, the ability to comb through literature, the ability to understand what is the most recent guidelines say about blood pressure care or diabetes or colon cancer, is by and large available through these powerful chat interfaces. We've heard from all of the large technology companies that as much as 20% of the queries that are being sent to like ChatGPT, for example, are health related. And so patients themselves are also hungry for these types of technologies as they're trying to navigate their own health and illness.
I'm smiling to hear you say that, because that's exactly where I wanted to go for the final topic of this discussion. Let me just set this up a little bit. One can be giddy with excitement about how cool these tools are, or petrified about the speed of change and the fact that it's hard to know where all of this is going. We can be happy and a bit concerned that the usually slow-moving behemoth of our industry, chewing up 1/5 of the GDP, is now undergoing an incredible change. The very front lines of healthcare, the actual interaction between patients and doctors, is getting shaken in a way that you and I have probably never seen in our careers. But I think what you're alluding to is, why should all of that change stay inside traditional healthcare institutions? Why couldn't Amazon or Google not get involved?
Yeah. Well, I think we're seeing that every large technology company and many, many other vendors are releasing these products. So, a lot of tech companies have tried this in the past. Things like, I forget the names now, like Health Vault or, Apple or Google or Microsoft had traditionally done it. And those haven't been wildly successful. I think what's different now is, again, the technology offerings available within AI to really synthesize these insights and, to conversationally chat with patients. So I don't think it's going to stay locked into healthcare. And I think the rapid uptake and change in practice driven by ambient AI that we've seen in organized medicine, there's going to be an even faster and more transformative uptake out in the community, out by patients. And that will be a real disruptor in terms of where does the line between kind of what traditional healthcare looks like and how it interacts with patients, to really patients owning a lot of that information, insight, and what is that role and partnership going to look like? What will stay within traditional healthcare? What will move to new alternate venues of care? And I think we're going to see incredible amounts of change, large potential for disruption, and lots of tools being released directly out to consumers and patients.
Brilliantly said, Vinny. I think it's interesting in places where it's hard to get access, for example, to a good primary care physician, that these digital products could effectively provide less expensive but incredibly high-functioning digital concierge services.
I mean, there are places, as you know, throughout this world that don't have anywhere close to the trained, licensed professional that we take as, even with its limitations here in the US, we take somewhat for granted. And I anticipate that we're going to see leapfrogging type approaches out in large parts of this world where they don't have anything close to the infrastructure or the personnel available that we have. And we're probably going to be learning a lot about how these technologies get deployed in those environments fairly quickly. It's kind of like countries that skipped having landlines and jumped to cell phones, where the mobile economy is just hardwired entirely into the daily life of these places.
Yeah, well, you and I might be preaching to each other's choir at this point, but it does seem to me that of all the amazing breakthroughs that have characterized healthcare and medicine over the decades and the centuries, this relatively innocent sounding thing, an ambient AI scribe, is well on its way to creating one of the greatest revolutions inside healthcare delivery that we've ever seen, outpacing all of the remarkable changes and advances we've seen in healthcare in the past.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. This is going to be a ride that I don't think anyone can anticipate where it's going today. Except that the technology is improving so rapidly. Its potential for disruption for the traditional approaches to healthcare, sick care and well care and, health maintenance and the concepts of what is the doctor, who is the patient, how are they interacting together. All of those are going to be changing radically, driven by, this technology. And so I think it's really amazing times right now.
Well said, Vinny. I can't thank you enough for joining me for this informative and imaginative discussion. We'll have to have you back on the show soon.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Healthy Dialogue, where we've been discussing Ambient AI Scribes with Vinny Liu. We hope you found the discussion informative and thought-provoking. To learn more about JAMA Network research on AI, check out the resources listed in our episode notes. If you'd like to continue today's conversation, please subscribe, rate, and share our podcast. You can also email us questions related to this podcast at healthydialogue@jamanetwork.org. Until next time, thank you for listening to Healthy Dialogue. This episode was produced by Matthew O'Connor, Daniel Morrow, and myself, Derek Angus. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com. Thanks for listening.
This content is protected by copyright by the American Medical Association with all rights reserved, including those for text and data mining, AI training, and similar technologies.